Hello, everybody. Good morning. Happy Monday. And welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox, and our assistant editor, Jason Beattie, whose specialty is politics that way. We're going to take you through the best stories in today's papers and help you make sense of what's happening in the world, hopefully, and maybe we'll make some sense of it for ourselves while we're there. Through it all, we want you to ask your own questions, so get in the comments below. Ask us the thing that's bothering you and we'll do our best to answer them for you. You don't even have to keep them polite. It's fine. We don't mind. We're journalists. We're used to being abused. So what have we got today? The most well-protected man in the world has a deadly disease still, despite his best efforts. Test and trace has all but collapsed, and the royals have descended into fighting via the medium of publication, which always works so well and all journalists absolutely love and are very grateful for. But first, here is a short video released yesterday by Donald Trump from his hospital room.
We're getting great reports from the doctors. This is an incredible hospital, Walter Reed. The work they do is just absolutely amazing, and I want to thank them all, the nurses, the doctors, everybody here. I've also gotten to meet some of the soldiers and the first responders, and what a group. I also think we're going to pay a little surprise to some of the great patriots that we have out on the street. And they've been out there for a long time, and they've got Trump flags, and they love our country.
So, is he a dead man driving or not, Jason?
Well, he's not doing the driving. He's being driven, Susie. And this is quite extraordinary. I mean, we've always kind of referred to this as the Kardashian White House, but he's taken the soap opera of kind of, the highest level of American politics to a new low. He's broken every single rule here of what you're meant to do if you have COVID. You're meant to be confined to your hospital bed. You're meant to recover. You're meant to then kind of make sure you don't be contagious or infect anybody else. So what's he do? He jumps in the back of the Beast. That's the big American limo which the president drives around in, which is not only bulletproof, it's sealed proof in case of a chemical attack. His poor driver and anybody else who was in the security team is now at risk of infection. This is not good practice. But then what are we used to with the president? He's a guy who said drink bleach.
Exactly. Yeah, so they're all now having to go into quarantine, which is the thing that Donald Trump should be in and isn't in. Yep. We've also got a man here enjoying all the benefits of state-funded healthcare, despite having spent the last 4 years trying to deny it to everybody else in the USA. Is this going to play well at all? I mean, he's very happy.
A little bit of interference there. That's the optics here. I mean, you've seen these pictures of not just one doctor in a white coat outside the hospital, but a dozen of them flanking him. And this is, as you say, the best private healthcare you can get in America. At the same time, Trump's lawyers are trying to strike out the Obamacare bill in the court. And that gives, free health cover to millions of Americans. And people are going to look at this and go, hang on, you've got this care, and you're trying to take it away from me.
Exactly. It's not going to play. People don't like Trump already, though, and not going to like him still. People that do like him are out there on the street corner honking their horns every night, keeping the man awake when he's trying to get well. And there's a lot of swing voters in between, and they're the ones that everybody's trying to spend the money and get the campaign ads, trying to catch those swing voters. They're the ones that will help it go either way, because it is still fairly close. Biden's pulled his attack ads, so he's on the back foot now. Doesn't he need to get those ads up so he can make the most of this and start cashing in?
It's a difficult one for Joe Biden. The last you can do as a politician is kind of be seen to revel in your opponent's discomfort in a situation like this. You have to be careful, because as soon as you're seen as kind of trying to exploit an illness, that's going to play badly with voters. So, this is part of the whole Biden campaign. I'm the decent candidate. I'm the one who's trying to, restore pride in America and pride in the office. So he can rise above it for a bit. But the harder bit is for Trump. And this is part of a whole macho politics world we live in anyway. Politicians aren't allowed to be ill. They are there to try and look, particularly male politicians, I should stress, they're there to kind of we're in charge.
Don't forget Hillary. She got pneumonia, right? She was mocked. She partly lost the election because Trump's going on about, how infirm she is and how she's not going to be able to handle the pressures of office.
Precisely. And that's why you got this ridiculous photo stunt of him kind of, going around the block, trying to waving at his, what he calls patriots, his supporters. But this is going to be difficult for Trump. One, we don't know how ill he is. The reports coming out are conflicting. There's no, one moment the doctors are saying he's going to make a recovery and he could be discharged today. The next moment we're saying, he's been on oxygen and he's on steroids. And as we do know with COVID, it has two phases. You get the disease initially, and then there's a slight recovery, and then you can relapse, and you can relapse really seriously. And that could happen. We just don't know. The information isn't out there. And then, if he is hit badly by COVID, and we saw what happened with Boris Johnson, who's a good 20 years younger, how kind of ravaging this disease can be, that's going to really put a dampener on his ability to campaign in the last kind of 30 days of this election. And what does Trump do best? He does rallies. He kind of energizes the base, and you can't energize the base from your sickbed.
No. And as Rosemary points out, she says maybe it's a stunt before the elections. I'm not sure it's a stunt, Rosemary, because there's too much at risk if this is a stunt. However, the world that Trump's created of constantly questioning facts and truth and saying things are fake news means that when something does happen that might be true, like him having COVID, suddenly everyone's going, oh, it's a conspiracy. This is more fake news. Even his opponents have bought into his way of looking at the world, of constantly questioning and thinking that everything's, not as you can see and everything's a conspiracy. But let's move to our next story because everyone's getting on. So it turns out, and it's reported in the Mirror today, that the Tories have been locking down Tory Labour areas before they're locking down the Tory areas. In particular, one of those constituencies which has got quite a high rate of COVID infections is Rishi Sunak's constituency of Richmond in Yorkshire. And what they have been doing is in some of the Labour areas, they started locking down when cases were about 60 per 100,000. And Richmond is now at that point, and they're not locking that one down. Now, the cases in places like Birmingham are now much, much higher, but they're still protecting, it would seem, these Tory areas. Have I got it right, Jason? What's going on? How can they get away with it?
That's more or less it. It's, I think Richmond, last time I looked, it was kind of 84 per 100,000. Other constituencies which have escaped so far the lockdown, despite having a high prevalence of cases, is Newark. That's the constituency of the Community Secretary, Robert Jenrick. So there seems to be a pattern here. Now, the explanation from the government is, the rate of infection is not the only thing they take into account. What else they do take into account, they're not quite telling us, but it clearly is that there's an insinuation that maybe politics is coming into play here, that they don't want the backlash from disgruntled businesses and constituents in their local patch, and therefore, let's dump this on Labour areas because they don't really matter. They can take the heat.
Yeah, but some of these are red wall seats, which they put so much effort into catching this election. And this is what the last election in 2019 helped them win, these red wall seats. And these are the jobs and these are the economies that their critics would say they're throwing out with the bathwater, and that's it. They're shutting down these areas, and they're not caring about the state they're in. Now, Boris or Rishi may well say, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here, they might say, well, look, we know that COVID spreads more in areas that are poorer, in areas of health inequality, in areas of deprivation, of more crowded housing, more ethnic minorities. So yes, we did close down areas like that earlier, and they just happen to be the other side's areas. It's, does that theory work?
Well, Rishi Sunak's got a big speech to the Tory party conference today, which is obviously being done remotely. And there's a sense that, some of the shine is starting to come off. He had a very successful kind of early part of the outbreak. He was very quick to introduce the furlough. He got support. Even the trade unions were praising him. I haven't seen, Len McCluskey praise a Tory chancellor, in my lifetime. And then, as the kind of the economy has started to worsen, the jobless figures have started to kind of rise, Rishi doesn't seem quite so secure. He can't decide which side he's on, whether he's he's kind of going with the kind of what we call the doves in the cabinet, who are those saying, look, we've got to put health before the economy, or there's the hawks who are saying it's the economy and forget the rest. And you've seen that Rishi has now definitely moved towards the side of the hawks. He's given, interviews today suggesting, that he's questioning the 10 p.m. curfew. The problem here is he gave the impression he could save every job, and now obviously he can't. And the furlough is coming to an end at the end of this month. And then you've got all these areas now in lockdown, which is kind of, over a third of the country. It's a substantial number of people, and there's no additional help for them. Now, if you're in the hospitality industry, just for example, we can come to the Mirror's Flash today, which looks at the cinema world, where an awful lot of jobs are going as well. If you're in those sort of sectors, hospitality, leisure, there seems to be nothing for them now at all. It's kind of helped to get into a job, but nothing helped to save you from losing your job.
And not much help to get into the next one. There's no upskilling, no retraining. If you're sort of under 25, you might get an apprenticeship. But if you're over 40, if you're a mum and you want to go part-time or something and use this opportunity to spend more time with the family or something like that, you can't do it. You're not going to be able to capitalize on it. Now, don't forget, everyone who are watching this, please put your comments, put your questions in the comments below, and we're going to get to those at the end. But ask us about Trump, ask us about test and trace, ask us about Rishi Sunak. That's something we have barely mentioned, actually. The collapse of the test and trace system. It turns out this weekend that 16,000 cases haven't been put on the database. So they haven't been tracing all those people. They know they tested positive, but they just haven't been added in. So the figures have suddenly massively rocketed over the weekend. Now, is this a fault? Do we know if this is a fault of the fact that they've got a half test and trace system that's NHS and a half test and trace system that's private? Is it because they're not talking to each other?
There's a massive blame game going on between Public Health England, which seems to be kind of the whipping boy of everything which goes wrong. They're trying to blame what they say is a quango. Actually, it's not. The responsibility for Public Health England lies with the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, and what they also call NHS Test and Trace, which actually is a kind of private operation, but they tag the name NHS on. A lot of people, if you say NHS Test and Trace, I immediately get bombarded on Twitter or get emails going, it's nothing to do with the NHS. And I get that point. It's not. This is the Dido Harding, the Tory peers' little empire. And nobody quite knows where responsibility for this kind of quite horrific kind of blunder lies. 16,000 people who've just suddenly been miscounted or lost, that's 16,000 people who've been out there for a couple of weeks, kind of potentially spreading the infection. This is quite serious, and it's bad for Matt Hancock because overall he's in charge of this, but it's also bad for Boris Johnson when what's the main charge against the Prime Minister at the moment? He doesn't do detail. He's not competent. And this just feeds into that narrative. It's a gift for Keir Starmer come Wednesday at Prime Minister's Questions.
And here's the problem. Paula has just said, how accurate are the testing results now, please? This is part of the issue, Paula. The testing results are as accurate as they've always been. They're as accurate as they were right at the start of the pandemic. It's not a different test that is done. The problem is that the public's faith in those results have been shaken for no sort of scientific reason, because the tests are the same, but they've been shaken because of the way the government's handled the pandemic, because of the changes in instructions, because of the confusion, because of the U-turns, because of Barnard Castle, because of Professor Pantsdown, all of it. People go, well, I don't know what to put my faith in anymore. And that's a huge part of the problem. And it's a huge part, I would have said, of a second spike and people not wearing masks and people not social distancing and people getting continually infected and maybe dying as well. So it's a good point. Well made, Paula. So keep asking us your questions. Finally, we're going to talk about the royals. Now, I can remember when I was a young thing and starting out as a journalist, there were a couple of royals who kept having fights via books. Right. And Princess Diana, there was a book about Princess Diana came out and the press regulator said, this is outrageous, massive intrusion. There's no way, because it talked about her having bulimia and all the rest of this stuff. And then it was revealed that actually she'd given a load of tapes to Andrew Morton, who wrote his book. And then Prince Charles wrote a book or gave an interview to people. And then there were TV interviews going between them as well. And they were having this really unedifying fight, which was dividing the country and dividing the royal family. And now here we are. Harry and Meghan have had their book out, which they had nothing to do with, but is really, really nice to them. And now there's another one out giving the courtiers' side of the story, written by a guy called Tom Bower, who's quite well respected. And it's all about how the Queen tried to intercede and how they tried to help them and how they all just, the courtiers' despair at the sort of the impetuousness of the way Harry and Meghan handled everything. I just very briefly, Jason, is this going to end well? Is this always going to end in another sort of mutual panorama between the two sides? What's going to go on?
Well, the royals, they need publicity. They are, that's how they operate. They try to control it, and they not always succeed. And this is an example, I think, where they're not succeeding. It's, without, it is a kind of, a slight mirage for the royal family. Without the attention, they are nothing. So they need to kind of keep providing the kind of the entertainment, the soap opera to keep people engaged with them. But
they hate it. They hate the attention, and they hate the soap opera, and they hate it when people get things right, and they hate it when people get things wrong. But they can't tell us when it's wrong, because then they'd have to start telling us when it was right.
What I find fascinating is it's part of the kind of the whole kind of cultural wars that, if you ask people under 40, are you in the camp of Harry and Meghan, or are you in the camp of William and Kate? They're all at the under 40s, the millennials, they're all in Harry and Meghan's camp. If you ask those who are slightly older, which side you're on, they're all in, they're all in William's camp. William and Kate, they're the kind of, the kind of very kind of almost kind of suburban kind of respectable royals, as opposed to the kind of more woke royals of Harry and Meghan. And I kind of find it fascinating just how it's divided the country. Which side you choose.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Are you a Harry or a Will?
I was very much a Meghan, and I loved the way she walked herself down the aisle. I loved the fact there was a mixed race person in the royal family. I loved the fact that they were, going to do some philanthropic work, and perhaps she knew roughly what she was getting into because fame wasn't unusual to her. But I misjudged the fact that, and I always loved Harry because he reminded me of Henry IV, pretty much. Henry IV, Part 1. Sorry, Shakespeare reference, a bit early in the morning. But the trouble is, I think they've got this problem I've seen with other people who have married across the Atlantic, which is that although you share a common language, you're completely divided culturally. And that's not a race issue. That is because an American has married a Brit, and she's married into the most important part of the British Constitution, which has to keep its mouth shut. And no American is good at that at all. I've never met an American who is happy to be quiet, even more so than me. So they're gonna have this huge issue anyway, always gonna have an issue constitutionally. So I don't think she got the 1,000 years of history, the way we have abused every single female who's ever been part of the royal family, and the way that was always seen as a threat and potentially civil war. And I think that's kind of, over 1,000 years, it's been bred into the British psyche that women entering the royal family is potentially divisive and destabilizing influence. It's part of the problem. But now, I think I've got to say, Kate and Wills have had a blinder of a pandemic, haven't they? They've played bingo, they've baked rolls. There we go. They keep baking those rolls. They've done really well. They've had Zoom calls with David Attenborough. It's all dandy. And Harry and Meghan have moved to the centre of the pandemic and Trump world, where there's a battle, the streets are on fire, and they're about to have some kind of coup or civil war. I can't see that they've played it very well. So I think my faith is more in Kate and William at least being there for the long term, obviously because of the job they're doing. Whereas I think if the situation were reversed and Harry and Meghan were about to, in line for the throne, I'd be like, this isn't going to go at all well. Be very bad. Right. I think we've come to an end pretty much. We've got one final question from Dan Wheeler. I find it absolutely disgusting that businesses such as Cineworld are having to close down due to lockdowns and restrictions that are beyond their control. What's the government going to do to fix it all? Jason.
Well, it's a good question, Dan, and we were, reflected on it slightly earlier, but this is the problem, is the furlough scheme comes to an end at the end of October. There have been appeals by the trade unions, by the Labour Party, by business groups saying, look, for certain sectors, particularly certain sectors such as, the leisure industry, Cineworld, for example, which just needs time. They just need additional help from the government. And, we can see that there will be an end to this at some point. It may be months, it may be a couple of years. And these are viable businesses if they can have the support now. And it's what's so extraordinary is that Sunak seems almost blind to this. He seems to have gone into a sink or swim mentality, when at one point he was saying, we're going to kind of try and help every business, and that no longer applies. And I don't understand why.
No, well, it's never applied to self-employed people like me, pretty much. Thank you, Rishi. If you're watching, thanks a bunch. Right, thank you very much for joining us, viewers. It's been great fun. We're going to let you get on with your day, and we're going to get on with ours, but hopefully you're a little bit better informed than you were when you woke up this morning. That's our aim. Right, thank you very much. Bye-bye.